Hi there. Welcome to Mushroom Hour. Today on Mushroom Hour, we're excited to speak with Erica Davis, founder of Wild Food Girl. Erica started writing her adventures with wild food back in 2009 at her blog, and later in a monthly magazine called Wild Edible Notebook. She teaches a course on useful plants at Colorado Mountain College and conducts plant walks around the state. She is also a regular presenter at the Midwest Wild Harvest Festival in Wisconsin. Erica's educational background includes a BA in archaeology, an elementary school teaching credential, and an MA in technology-based education. Today, she maintains an active Facebook community and is hard at work on her first book about edible wild plants in the West. Her incredible body of work is carefully compiled, and you can tell she has worked diligently to provide accurate, useful, safe, and whenever possible, lesser-known information. Her tremendous enthusiasm for finding, studying, identifying, tasting, experimenting with, and creating delicious meals with edible wild plants is apparent in her work, and I look forward to sharing a little bit of her ongoing journey. Erica, it's terrific to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really like your podcast and looking forward to it.
That's an honor. And this is funny because right before the show, you let me know that you usually are the one interviewing people.
Yeah, I work as a freelance writer, and so I've done a lot of interviewing of people, and I don't normally get interviewed. So this is fun.
So this is a unique opportunity, to say the least. Well, there's a lot to talk about, both with your work with wild plants, wild mushrooms, all the philosophy and actual practice that goes along with that, and your book, and so much to cover. But I always like to know folks' origin stories and how you developed your obsession with wild foods and wild plants. How did it all begin for you?
Sure. Yeah, that's an easy one. I have an uncle who was really into wild food foraging. He had Yule Gibbons' book, Stalking the Wild Asparagus. And whenever he'd visit, we'd go on walks in the woods and we'd taste things and try things and make things. I guess I was really fascinated with the idea that you could pick something from the wild or, the side of a street too, and that could be food. I think as a child, I was very influenced by that. I thought food came from the grocery store and from the garden. I didn't realize that there was wild food growing all around.
Wow, what a blessing to have an uncle who is able to introduce you to this whole world of wild food. And do you think wild food resonated with you because of your personality specifically and your upbringing? Or do you think this is something innate that we're tapping into? Or do you think it's more specific on an individual level that certain people like wild food and foraging? Maybe a little of both?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure. Certainly, we all have wild food in our backgrounds. Everyone around the world has wild food in their background, whether it was many, many, many generations ago or more recent. Is our ability to learn about edible wild foods or our interest innate? I'm not sure if that makes it innate or not, but certainly a part of all of us. I suppose some people are more drawn to it than others. I'll admit I was a bit of an oddball growing up in small town Connecticut, wanting to forage and eat wild food. My friends thought I had an interesting hobby, but weren't necessarily all super engaged with it. Although I think kids do get very interested in exploring the world with their senses. So maybe the younger the children, the more prone they are to be interested at first.
And I know I just hoisted kind of a very large psychological question on you there, but it's something interesting to think about. And as I talk with more and more people, there seems to be a general undercurrent that, especially when folks, like you're saying, are exposed as children, there's something about it that's interesting. And there's something about it, or something about searching for wild foods is like wholesome and good somehow. Probably has no small part to do with our ancient relationship with wild food and the fact that's what we ate for a lot of human history. So you personally, you had your uncle showing you the way, but how did you start to develop your skills when it came to wild food?
Well, as a child, I did gather some things. I had a hard time with the line drawings in books like Stalking the Wild Asparagus, so I amassed a small collection of plants that I got a lot of experience with,
Right.
and then I kind of went through this circuitous route of studies and decisions about what I wanted to do with my life. But when I got to Colorado, that was a little more than 10 years ago, I started diving into books, whatever I could find at the library. Cattell Bob Seebeck is a well-known wild plants writer in this region, and I found one of his books, so I kind of drank that in. He also invited me to attend a class, and so I amassed a lot of information that way too. So I would say, to a lot of what I've put together in terms of my foraging skill set has come from lots of books, a couple of classes, some mentoring by some wild food experts, a good friendship in Colorado with somebody who also likes to forage edible wild plants. So we've done that together a lot and increased each other's information base in so doing. And then a lot of trial and error. I find out a plant is edible. I find out what part is edible. And then I experiment with it in the kitchen to try to make it into something that I'll eat and that my husband will eat.
That's the real test.
It is the real test. Yeah, definitely.
Nowadays, I know a lot of people are so reliant on the internet, but there is such a huge catalog of books that are so useful and packed full of information. And of course, are easy references, even if you're out in the field. You don't need an internet connection to be able to reference your handy book. What are some favorites? I know Stalking the Wild Asparagus obviously had its place, but what were some of the other favorites or go-tos for folks listening that really helped you navigate the world of wild food and wild plants?
Sure. So a little bit later in that journey, I came upon Sam Thayer's books, and he has The Forager's Harvest, Nature's Garden, and his most recent Incredible Wild Edibles. And Sam kind of set a new standard for foraging literature in the U.S. There are a lot of great resources out there that are like 100 edible wild plants, and they do a great service in covering the breadth of edible wild plants that are out there. But what Sam did with his books is that he picked 40 plants or so per book and just really got into depth with those so that you can very clearly identify them. There's multiple photos for each plant. And then he wrote up his experiences, his firsthand experiences, when to harvest, what to harvest, how to cook it. So that his books definitely helped me to develop closer relationships with the plants that he covers. And it's his books that I hope to emulate in my own book, that depth and probably the similar number of plants that I'll cover as well.
Samuel Thayer is someone who I've now been introduced with through having the chance to speak with you, and actually Orion Aon of Forage Colorado also recommended that I dig into Samuel Thayer's work. So many good resources out there. In general, is foraging for you more of a hobby, something you do in your free time, or has it become more of like a lifestyle for you?
I'm going to answer with a pretty non-committal both. I do it as much as I can. And of course, I'm dedicating quite a lot of time right now to writing the book. So I guess a bit of a lifestyle right now, but it's
inherent in that question. There is a gray area, right? Like, where is that boundary from when a hobby becomes a lifestyle? What is that? I think for a lot of folks, foraging kind of takes over your life. So even if it's a hobby in terms of how much you do it, there's like a constant obsession and you're kind of always thinking about it and living your life by, the cycles by which certain wild foods emerge and things.
I can say that the more plants I learn and the more plants I make a lot of use of, the larger the foraging calendar gets in my head. And the more plants I'm dedicated to going to observe or harvest from, in each season. So yeah, I guess in that regard, it has become a bit more of a lifestyle.
Well, I guess what are the foraging seasons there in Colorado? And then I want to also talk about, why Colorado is kind of an interesting habitat for foraging, because I think there are a lot of different environments in Colorado that many of us might not be familiar with. What is the general kind of foraging season for you, or has it become now, due to your experience, the entire year?
Yeah, I usually take a little bit of a break in winter, or winter is when I'm using, plant resources that I've put up for the winter. So we eat out of the frozen food that I've put up, or the dried mushrooms, or the berries and so forth. But, for the rest of the season, spring is the time when you get that big rush of wild greens coming up. And I love spring. Up here, I live at 10,000 feet, which is a bit improbable, I know. So we have snow for a lot of the year. The spring up here isn't until like late May. But I usually head down to the Denver area or, to lower elevations around 5,000 or 6,000 feet in April and early May for the spring green season. And we get everywhere gets a lot of edible wild mustards in spring. So, the mustard family provides a lot of our cultivated vegetables as well, like broccoli and kohlrabi and kale and arugula and Brussels sprouts and cauliflower. So there's also lots and lots of wild mustards that are edible and come up in spring. So head down for those. And then you start getting your summer greens, your goosefoot and orac, which are related to spinach. And then, there's a bit of a quieter time in midsummer, although there are a couple of great vegetables to get at that time. And then mid to late summer, you start getting your berries and your fruits and mushrooms. And now you're getting seed season. So I also do a lot of foraging of seeds. And I know that some people find them a bit too fiddly to work with.
Well, and when you say foraging for seeds, what does that look like? Because I don't think I've spoken with anyone who really does forage for seeds.
Yeah. Well, you've got to wait till the plants, generally, you're waiting until the plants have dried out. And then you can either strip seeds off of the seed heads of the plants, or, I'm learning more about how indigenous people used seed beaters in the Great Basin and West, that you would hit the seed heads with this, it's almost like a ping pong paddle looking shape. And hit the seed heads into your bigger basket. And that way only the ripe seeds are coming off, and you can come back and do it again, but you're not damaging the plant as much. So that's a bucket list thing for me, is to get a seed beater and try it that way. But some of the seeds I get are like goosefoot or lamb's quarter seeds, which are very closely related to quinoa. Amaranth seeds. I get some mustard seeds, and I make mustard condiments with them.
Terrific.
For that I often use field pennycress seeds, although in other regions you could find black mustard as well.
What a terrific untapped resource. The fact that when the plants have dried up, you can retrieve the seeds. And I'm sure, and I don't know, if you know this or not, but I'm sure they're loaded with nutrition.
I would think so. And I do look at nutritional information, but I suppose that's not the stuff that sticks in my head as well as other stuff.
Sure.
Yeah. And in fact, in the Great Basin, which is, west of the Rockies and across to the Sierra Nevada, seeds were a really important part of indigenous people's diets. So, heading further east, you had more starchy root vegetables to make use of, arguably, and, more nuts in the trees. But seeds were very important in this region.
It's fascinating to look at how the practices of wild food collection are shaped based on geography and how they've shaped peoples over time. And this kind of gets to something that I think is really interesting, which is the idea of indigenous peoples' relationship with wild food and how they may have been pioneers of agroforestry as we think of it today. What do you know about that? I mean, what do you know about how indigenous peoples were able to curate the land to produce wild food and then use it versus that European influence that kind of saw this as all wild and, no organization to it, if you will?
I first learned of this from Sam's most recent book, but also I'm reading a book now, Tending the Wild by M. Cat Anderson. And that is a pretty seminal work that talks about, particularly in California, and indigenous people's management of the land. Oh, they called it like caring for the land, right? Yeah, so basically, she explains how when early explorers got to California, they viewed this beautiful, magnificent landscape, this park-like landscape with not a lot of underbrush and high productivity of root vegetables and berries and so forth as wilderness. Not everybody, but certainly some people viewed it as this wilderness, this idealized wilderness, when in fact it was carefully managed landscapes to maximize production of useful edible plant species and mushrooms. And that was based on traditional ecological knowledge that had been developed over millennia, and that in fact, the plants themselves seem to have co-evolved with their human tenders so that you would get thriving. There's a root vegetable I'm investigating right now, which is yampa in the genus Peridoridia. And yampa is an edible root vegetable that's quite potato-like in texture. It's not tough. It's a very good vegetable, but small. Those gardens of yampa were carefully tended. Indigenous harvesters would dig the root out and then leave behind fragments or small corms or sometimes large corms. And these were harvested in large, large quantities and came back every year. So you sometimes read, there's kind of a prevalent stereotype that indigenous people caused declines in plant species by overharvesting. In her book, she basically explains how it's more likely that the lack of indigenous tending of landscapes right now is causing the decline of these plant species that have come to depend on people tending them.
What a shift in perspective to see what folks thought of as untamed land. We're the first quote unquote civilized people to come here, and look at all this wilderness. And what actually they were stepping into was kind of people that were on, this ancient, what now we see as the future of land management, sustainable land management. As more and more people, I'm in California, and obviously it's happening all around, but there are certain areas here in Northern California that are these hotbeds of kind of permaculture training and permaculture classes. And it's just so fascinating to think at one time, huge parts of the United States may have been under essentially a permaculture or agroforestry regime by peoples who had studied this for thousands of years. I mean, not that we need any more reinforcement that kind of traditional views on native peoples were really not informed at all, but this just blows that wide open, and suddenly you see people that were really, in some ways, more advanced than we are today.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's, this interest in traditional ecological knowledge and management of agricultural or horticultural systems has led me to the science of agroecology, which looks at agricultural systems from an ecological perspective. So how can you have agriculture while also being ecologically sound? And a lot of what's been studied is traditional agricultural systems around the world. Those that have survived industrial agriculture. Let's say in the highlands of Mexico, someone is raising their crops. Sure, they're conducting agriculture. They're raising crops that they depend on to live. But then you also get what we call weeds popping up in the fields.
Right.
And the weeds are made use of too, and they're not necessarily considered wild, but a lot of those weeds are the wild edible plants that we harvest today, as foragers. And there's a reason that they're so successful in disturbed landscapes, because they have co-evolved with human tenders. They've been welcome in the garden, goosefoot, amaranth, wild tomatillos.
Sure.
There's a plant that we call quickweed in the genus Galansoga that is called huascas in Spanish, and it's a major ingredient of the Colombian soup ajiaco. That's growing in my greenhouse here at 10,000 feet. It just popped up. It's all over, the Colorado lowlands and the gardens, and very few people know of it and use it.
So we're dismissing these plants as weeds that are really agricultural powerhouses that have evolved with humans and are perfectly suited in some ways to growing in areas where there's human disturbance.
Absolutely. There's a lot of them.
How do we shift toward a more holistic sense of what agriculture should be? Is it happening, or is this something that really is going to take a lot of demonstration or a lot of practice before we see it implemented in any wide scale?
Yeah, and I'm afraid to say that here we're kind of getting to the boundaries of my knowledge. As I've been researching this book, I've found that there are so many fields that inform it. I mean,
Yeah.
and I've had to dive into all these different fields, and it feels rather superficial still to this point. But I mean, you've got botany and taxonomy, you've got ethnobotany and archaeobotany and archaeology and agriculture. I'm actually a relatively new gardener, so it's a constant delight, but I'm still learning.
Yeah. I'm kind of musing and throwing massive questions at you that probably no one has the answer to. But it just seems to be like a really inspiring way of looking at the world. As with most things in the field of wild food, these fields of permaculture, there's so much hope there. Some possible solutions are really ancient and involve organisms that are readily available. We just need to shift our own narratives of how we see these things. And there could be pretty easy solutions to massive problems like, the negative externalities of industrial agriculture and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, and in plain terms, there is a lot of food right before our eyes in the
Yes.
garden, that where we're cultivating crops. And, it's funny because I teach a lot of wild food classes, and people sometimes are averse to the idea of taking a little walk around a disturbed area. Like, here's the class in my yard. But there's a lot of interest in taking a walk in a beautiful forest. And I understand that too. But I do think a good first step for foragers is to learn to make use of the plants in their yard that are going to come back every year. You figure out what you like to make with dandelions, and you can also put up dandelions for the winter and eat those
Yeah.
dandelions all winter long, and they haven't been sprayed with herbicides. And, actually took me a while to figure out how I liked eating dandelions, but I have the best way to eat them now. And I have to put up my dandelion crop every
Okay,
spring
well,
now.
now we need to know what is the best way to eat dandelions. It's such a pervasive wild plant that so many
Yeah,
people talk about foraging. What is the best way to eat dandelions?
sure. And I have to admit, in the high country, we're pretty rich with these giant leafy dandelions for whatever
Oh man.
reason. It stays cool here. They don't get bitter as quickly, I guess. But yeah, oftentimes to find the best way to make something, I really like to look to cultural context. And so,
Mm,
who's been using dandelions forever? The
right.
Italians. So
Wow.
actually, yeah, absolutely.
I wouldn't
So,
expect that. Okay.
yeah, and there are others, of course. So my late father-in-law's wife she's Italian, and she grew up in Philadelphia in an extended multi-generational Italian family. And like many kids who were bent on acculturation, she wasn't excited when her grandparents would go out into the field to gather the dandelions. Can't
Right.
we eat normal food? I ate this. And I picked her brain. What is this dish that they would make that you hated? I asked. And so she said, well, I don't remember well what it was called, but I think we called it manest. And manest appears to be a predecessor of minestrone, which uses
Ooh.
noodles and beans. So her description of manest was just basically a brothy vegetable soup made with delicious, if you can, farm raised delicious vegetables. And you can add a little bit of a flavoring to the broth if you want to, but you basically make this brothy soup. And then in a separate pot, you take your rough chopped dandelion greens and you drop them into boiling water until they're soft, a couple minutes, and then drain. You extract some of the bitter element that way. And then you plate, if you're not vegetarian, you plate them with sausage, pan fried Italian sausage, the broth, the dandelion greens, and a little bit of nice cheese like pecorino grated on top. And it's just this wonderful, little bit bitter, just wonderful soup. Like, I can't get enough of it. I have the recipe at my website if anyone's interested, but my husband will eat a lot of that.
It passed the husband test. We know
It
it's a good
passed.
recipe. Well,
Yeah.
how hugely inspiring to start there with plant foraging. That's something that's really captured my imagination. And I'm pretty sure every guest who I've talked to about foraging wild plants, I've asked that very question, is what we open the door into our backyard. I mean, what can we pick out of there? What food lies in wait? So dandelions are a huge one. What are some other wild plants that folks might find in their yard? We don't need, an exhaustive list, but just maybe one or two others that folks can keep an eye out for.
Gosh, in the yard, among the weeds we're talking about, it sounds like. I mean, I would look to the wild mustards, and I know we've already talked about them. In the West, some of those include tumble mustard, white top, which is considered a noxious weed, and that's a pretty spicy one, but it makes, right before it flowers, it makes a cluster of buds, the flower buds. And if you think of that cluster of buds as akin to broccoli, then you can boil that and use it like a slightly spicy broccoli. And I have to give credit to my dear friend and foraging companion, Butter, who she's taken a bit of a hiatus from blogging, but she has an awesome compilation of recipes. Hunger and Thirst for Life.blogspot.com. And she introduced me to the merits of white top. So what else? Wintercress is another one that's historically been very popular among Italian folks. What else? I mean, in my yard, I get a plant with the unfortunate name of poverty weed, which is actually,
weed.
Yeah, that name has been given to a number of different plants. So it underscores the importance of using scientific names. So that's, those are plants that grow in poor soil are sometimes called poverty weed. That one is Monolepsis nataliana, and that is a dry land loving plant. It's in the desert Southwest, and it comes into Colorado. And it's a weed, which is native. It's a native weed. It likes disturbed areas, but it's native to this country, to this area. That's another spinach relative that you could use the greens.
There's such more interesting greens out there, and especially the flavors. You said the wild mustards. I'm sure people know what mustards taste like, but mustard greens have that spice and that bite to them. They're just so much more interesting. So I really love this idea of seeing more and more great food out there. Not that it's like a replacement and you could use it instead of grocery store food. In my mind, I'm starting to realize no, it's actually better than what you're going to find in the store most of the time.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that. I mean, not everybody loves new flavors, and then some people really love new flavors. So it depends where you're coming from, and you have to be careful to forage in areas that haven't been sprayed with herbicides or pesticides. I mean, that's a very real concern. But yeah, I do think one by one, you learn an edible wild plant that grows on your property or grows somewhere where you're invited to forage, and one by one, you add variety and nutrients to your diet,
And at this point, do wild plants feature as a pretty prominent part of your diet? Because for me, the examples I'm giving, it would be one meal here and there, but it's not really a mainstay of the diet. I mean, you're freezing and putting up greens for wintertime, and imagine you're gathering a pretty significant amount. But is it a pretty big part of the diet at this point?
Yeah, it's funny. I get asked this question a lot. And, am I eating an exclusive wild diet? I sometimes get asked. And I would say it's still a supplement. I mean, a major supplement, but still a supplement. I laugh because Sam will tell me that he collected 55 gallons of blueberries. And then I've been lucky to get a pint or two of our tiny huckleberries.
55 gallons?
Yeah. And I'll get a pint or two of our tiny huckleberries up here. So, in Colorado, the carrying capacity of the land is lower than the rich eastern woodlands or California, which had much higher pre-Columbian populations. So, add to that, we've converted a lot of our land to other uses, whether, we're building towns, farms, mines. Colorado's a ranching state. And so depending how much grazing has occurred, some of the native plant populations are in decline because of it. So, when I decide how much to forage, I'm definitely seeking a balance of what makes sense for the land. And then also the amount of time I want to spend doing it. I do have another job and how much my husband will eat. And I know I'm giving him a hard time in this interview. So let's see, I don't buy mushrooms anymore. I put up
Yeah.
enough dried mushrooms for our uses. I rarely buy greens, but I grow some greens and I collect some greens. We eat them fresh when they're in season and I put them up for the winter.
Yeah.
So I don't buy jelly or berries because I get enough for our uses. But sometimes I'm just collecting plant samples in small enough quantities to practice with, to learn, to see,
Sure.
is this something I can use more regularly?
Sure. And I love the examples you just gave because it's really cool to hear that it doesn't have to be a 24/7 thing to start becoming a staple in certain areas. And that's kind of what I aspire to is, in my own foraging, which I don't get to put the amount of time in it that I necessarily want to. But I'm starting to get a little larder of dried mushrooms, we made our first jellies with cherry plums from our tree out in the back and a couple other wild trees. And so there's this really cool balance that you can strike. Again, it's just something that's empowering and just feels good. Your own jelly tastes better than the store jelly. I guarantee it.
I'm with you on that. I feel that way when I ferment my own pickles,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
they weren't meant to be pasteurized. There was a reason. Fermentation is a preservation process designed to make your food last, right? But it also carries with it health benefits too. So yeah, I like that do-it-yourself feeling. And I like that you mentioned your cherries in your tree. That is clearly a tree that was cultivated, right? Somebody
Right.
planted it. But there's lots of parts of cultivated vegetables people can use if they're trying to learn how to experiment with wild food. You can experiment with like your radish greens. Most people don't use radish greens, but
Right.
if you could figure out a good use for it, you're well on your way to learning how to figure out how to use edible wild plants too.
So we should probably talk about the book. It sounds like an all-encompassing, awesome book about wild food. So tell us more about the book you're writing, the layout, and what you cover.
Sure. So I am borrowing from the format that Sam developed in his book. So I'm going to do a
Right.
similar number of plants, 40 to 45 plants. And it is pretty hard to pick what I will include and what I won't include because I want to provide those more in-depth accounts so that, somebody finds that plant, they can really know how to use it. And I'm looking for a balance of plants. I'm trying to balance like greens, berries, root vegetables, seeds. I realize not everyone will want to forage seeds, but maybe someone will try and they'll have a couple of options in my book of what to collect and how to process the seeds and what to make with them. So I'm also looking for a balance of well-known plants that are easily found, like dandelions,
Right.
but if I can offer a new perspective or a new recipe or something that will help people to really make use of them, I'll consider that what I'm trying to do. And then I'm also trying to dig up some little known plants that are not highly represented in the foraging literature
Yeah.
that I've had to in various ways uncover and then practice on myself. And, so that I hope that'll be exciting for people who are more experienced foragers who are like, oh, I never knew that this plant could be eaten or was eaten. But I absolutely am trying to connect into cultural contexts where possible. Maybe there's a non-native species here that back in Poland has a long history of being collected and eaten. In fact, I do have one example of that that I'm
Yeah.
putting
Examples,
in the book.
please.
Curly dock is a pretty well-known edible, and my stepdad's family is Polish, and my grandmother always used to make głumpkies, which are these wrapped rice and meat filled little dumpling looking things that are wrapped in a cabbage leaf and baked in a tomato based sauce with sweet apples or sweet and tart apples. There's a
Sounds
lot
delicious.
of different versions of this. Stuffed grape leaves are kind of a version of this too. So this is a traditional preparation through a lot of Eastern Europe and the Middle East in various forms, also called sarma. My grandma always did this with cabbage leaves. And I read this ethnobotanical paper, this ethnobotany about the various leaves that were actually used historically. And curly dock leaves are one of them, so I adapted grandma's recipe and used curly dock to make my głumpkies.
That's so cool. You're pulling from the past, from people that actually use these wild foods all the time.
Yeah.
And bringing some of that knowledge back. I mean, I love when we can reach back into history and pull something that might have been forgotten.
And it's really exciting to me. Like when I posted that, I had a number of people of Eastern European descent who got really excited about it, you know, and whether they were recent arrivals here in the States or whether they maintained their cultural heritage and their cultural food traditions, or whether they're a couple generations divorced from them and seeking to reconnect, there was something that they could make. I get reactions sometimes from people who are just, they're honored to have this food featured or whatever. There was another example. I did a class in Silt, Colorado, and a Mexican-American gentleman approached me at the end, and he was eager to tell me about purslane, which is called verdolagas in Spanish, and another one of those so-called weeds that pops up in the garden that lots of people use for food. That's used around the world. And we got to talking, and then he told me that everybody he knows drinks alfalfa tea. Oh, really? Everybody you know drinks alfalfa tea?
Because I know no one that drinks alfalfa tea.
So I started drinking alfalfa tea, and it's a strong flavor to me, and I like it as a soup base, honestly. And it's full of nutrients, and I digress a little, but yes, wherever I can, if I can put the plants I'm talking about into a cultural context or an ecological context or a personal story that brings the plant to life, I'm going to do that. I'd like to connect everybody who's interested into this, no matter their background, because I do feel like wild food is something that connects all of us, you know, at some point, and even people from diverse political leanings as well.
Yes.
You know, I get people who are interested in new cuisines and flavors, you know, foodies. But I also get survivalists and doomsday preppers who are like, want to learn about edible wild plants for different reasons. So I feel like it's a nice connection point.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like, you know, for me at first, I thought it was mushroom foraging, which it is. Mushroom foraging and mushroom culture is this cool bonding that you can have with people regardless of their background, socioeconomic status, political belief, religious belief. It doesn't matter. If you like that, you're connected. But as I talk with more people that are just into all different kinds of wild foods and wild plants, everything, you realize that it is really this basis of connection. Maybe it's just food in general, but wild food especially, if people are interested in it, it's like such a strong bond that can supersede so many other things.
I like to think so too.
Yeah. Well, and what a fun journey you're on of digging into all these different cultures and finding out more about wild foods and really fleshing them out as, you know, from the sea of green, you're giving like a personality and a story to a lot of these plants.
Yeah. And honestly, like the best recipes come from people who've been working with that plant for generations. I mean, absolutely. You know, sometimes I've rejected an edible wild plant initially where I said, this tastes bad. I cooked it. It tastes bad. It tastes bad raw, you know, and then I find a recipe and go, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. You know?
Well, is there one or two that stand out of maybe recipes that you thought, wow, I would have never eaten that, but that recipe is amazing that are in the book?
You know, I think I'm going to answer that question with just a preparation method as opposed to a recipe. And so one, you know, it has been long known that goosefoot or lamb's quarter seeds, Chenopodium album, and all the closely related native species that are also prolific in the West. But it's been long known that those seeds are edible. And you read that, you know, I threw the seeds in with other grains, and a lot of times people's approach to working with those seeds is to cut them with other flours, other ingredients, because a lot of times they're super bitter, you know, and sometimes they even give people a scratchy throat a little bit. So I was digging into that and realized that, you know, in the various accounts that I read, that there's an extra processing step aside from just rubbing and getting the chaff off of the seeds. The seeds are coated with a substance that is most likely saponins or saponins, how you say that, this soapy, bitter substance. And so if you look at different ways of processing, for example, quinoa seeds, which also have this soapy, bitter substance, and quinoa is closely related to lamb's quarters, either they were parched and they were trod on or danced on to remove the powdery coating, or they were rinsed and rubbed. And modern quinoa processing does this. There are mechanized methods of removing this soapy substance, in order to actually get your lamb's quarter seeds not bitter and less irritating. You've got to rub and wash them, or parch and rub and wash them. So I've done a lot of experimenting with that. And yeah, it's a process, but certainly we can develop mechanized ways to do that too if we really want to. That's a good food resource that's around the world. But it wasn't until studying a lot of accounts that I realized, oh, that's why they're so bad and they don't feel good in my throat, because I'm not doing it right.
I mean, what an illustrative example of how useful it is to go back into history and figure out the ways to use these wild foods to their highest potential. Do mushrooms feature in the book at all?
Yeah, I'm not putting mushrooms in the book. I'm dedicating the book to plants. And in fact, this summer I was kind of laughing at myself because I love mushroom hunting. And I sometimes have started to think of it as this great distraction that takes me away from plants at certain seasons of the year.
No. Yeah. Not in the book, but when is mushroom season there? And, what are some of the mushrooms that you guys find there in Colorado?
So let's see. We have a spring mushroom season and we have, a late summer, fall mushroom season. So, the spring mushroom season, there are a couple, oyster mushrooms. I need to head down in elevation for spring oyster mushroom season. And then we get a different species here up high that comes out in the summer when we get a lot of rain of oysters. Then, morel season is in the spring. Down at lower elevations, the blonde morels come out first here. And then the black morels start popping up and moving up the mountains. And I've always been largely frustrated by morel hunting. I've struck out so many times, or I find like one morel a year. But actually, with Orion's help and that nice post he wrote about burn morels, I did find a huge fruiting last year, which is super exciting.
Oh, that's terrific.
Yeah, and I've had a number of experiences of finding huge fruitings. A lot of times with my good friend Butter, she's led me to a huge chanterelle fruiting, and I've led her to a huge porcini fruiting as well. So let's see. So moving on to the late summer fall mushrooms, because living at 10,000 feet, those are the ones that I have the easiest access to. And it has to be wet and warm for us to get a mushroom season, which this year wasn't. We're going through quite a drought in Colorado right now. But our porcini have been renamed Boletus rubriceps, which I guess people like to call rubies. They have kind of a maroon red cap.
Oh, okay.
And they're quite abundant up in this area. And Sarcodon imbricatus, hawkswings. I've collected some of the less favorite mushrooms like Albatrellus confluens and Albatrellus ovinus, this little mushroom with pores. I think Albatrellus confluens smells fruity, and I like the flavor. Some people say it's bitter.
I was wondering how elevation would affect things there, but it sounds like you're still getting some of the mushrooms that we know and love. Just you need to go to lower elevations to get the morels and some of the others.
How elevation affects things. For example, the porcini is going to be ready at slightly earlier in the month of August at the middle elevations. And then it moves up as things warm up here up high. At the pass near me where I like to go hunting for porcini, sometimes we just won't get a season. If it's wet but cold, it'll just be too cold up there. In fact, we just got a foot of snow last week. But I don't know if we're going to see porcini from that, even though it is good moisture. I'm going to still go looking.
Yeah. Colorado is such a different foraging area, and you get into these areas of differing elevations that end up being whole new habitats. I never thought about that. A middle elevation, high elevation, how these can be such a different habitat for mushrooms and lead to different seasons. And when it comes to mushrooms, who have you found? Because we laid out some books about plants, but were there any good books in particular that you liked that kind of broke down mushrooms in the West or in Colorado specifically?
The book that I started with is Mushrooms of Colorado, which is by Vera Stuckey Evanson. And that's actually the older, no longer available version of the book she put out more recently, which is Mushrooms of the Rocky Mountain Region. Her older book has a little bit more in terms of edibility information, but those are the two I've learned a lot from. And I've learned a lot from David Aurora's books as well, even though, he's covering a broader range, but I've also relied on his books. And I'm going to go back and read Orion's post about Matsutake because I haven't found those and I'm looking forward to it.
Is there a pretty big wild food community there in Colorado? I'd imagine because it's a little more rugged environment. I'd imagine there'd be more people kind of into this information, into wild food.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised by how much it's been exploding in the last couple of years. Yeah. I mean, so when I started writing about edible wild plants in 2009, there wasn't a big online presence. And so, I felt sometimes like I was shouting into the void, but there definitely were plant teachers here who predated my interests, who I've really relied on. And in their books, Cattail Bob Seebeck and Katrina Blair at Turtle Lake Refuge and so forth. So there has been a longstanding interest here, but I feel like there, at least from what I can tell online, there's just so much more interest now. I mean, there are a lot of people blogging about their work with wild food. And so, yeah, Colorado likes wild food. Definitely.
Yeah, it seems to fit with the whole region, the people that I've met from Colorado. I wouldn't be surprised if it was this huge wild food hotspot. It sounds like that's not too far off.
I would say that's true.
Well, where can people find your work, and what is Wild Food Girl? I mean, you started blogging back in 2009. What has that blog turned into for you? And how has that metastasized into online community and everything else for you?
Wild Food Girl is just a blog. Back when I started that, I was just interested in freelance writing, and my husband does web design and works with WordPress. Perfect, and so forth. Yeah. So he set me up a blog. My first blog was not Wild Food Girl. And I just started writing about whatever I felt like writing about. And then I looked at it and I went, 75% of this is about wild food. Maybe I should start a wild food website. So then Wild Food Girl started. And I have to say, I didn't know a lot when I started that. So it was really a bunch of funny stories, experiential stories of discovering a plant and trying the plant and so forth. And in recent years, I'd like to make that more of a resource to people who are interested in edible wild foods so they can get inspired and learn about different edible wild plants and so forth, and mushrooms. I haven't done a lot on the blog in recent years because I've been focusing my efforts on this book because I want to produce something that somebody can hold in their hand that will stand the test of time. Right. So I'm most active on Facebook right now. And so Wild Food Girl, if you search for that, you find it. And I've been trying to post every day recently, and I was inspired to do that by my friend and fellow blogger, Orion Aon of Forage, Colorado. But that's where people could find the most information from me at present. I also give classes, which are on hold because of COVID, but I've started I do a couple of weekend-long classes a year where people can come and learn plants and practice foraging hands-on, and then we cook things using those plants. So that's really well received.
The best.
Yeah, a lot of times people will learn an edible wild plant and they'll never use it unless you walk them through that.
Well, that is such a useful step, and that's why I love people who are doing what you do, which is sharing preservation techniques, sharing cooking techniques. In your case, you're reaching back and pulling all these amazing things out of different cultural heritages that we might not have known about, but just even shining light on that kind of second half of foraging. Because going out in the woods and finding the wild food gets all your endorphins flowing. You're out, maybe it's dopamine hits that you get when you're out there finding things. But then when you get back, it's like, what do I do with all this? And so that it becomes like this, what I call the second half, but probably more effort is actually the processing, storage, or preparation, if you want to eat it fresh, of the wild food.
Sure. Yeah. If you pick it, you got to use it. And, some people are really talented in the kitchen. They come up with these amazing uses I would never dream of. But certainly for the practical forager, I like to give a couple of ideas, how to use your dandelion greens.
And when I was looking at your blog, I know you said it's kind of out of date, and there were some great ideas of how to use different wild greens and wild foods. There are a lot of practical preparation methods and recipes. So I definitely encourage people to check out the Facebook group, check out the website, and I'm sure you'll pick up some inspiration and some ideas. And in terms of the book, do we have a release date, or is it still
man.
is it still kind of work in process? We don't really know.
This sounds like a long way off, but I'm aiming for summer 2022, just in terms of my calendar of, the plants are only growing for a certain period of time. So there's a lot of checking back I need to do, and photos I might have missed I need to do. So that's what I'm aiming for.
You're actually doing the photos, you're doing the recipes, the research. I mean, this is really a labor of love purely from Erica, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have some friends in the field that are helping me along the way. But yeah, for sure. And I'm taking a deep dive, and I'm consulting a lot of resources, and the library, has, sometimes they give me my own shelf for the loan books I order.
Okay, so we're going deep. We're going in the library loan books.
Oh yeah, lots of them.
Well, I'm excited then to keep tabs on that when the book comes out, because it does sound like a really thorough look at some of these wild foods from start. And you could even say, from the ancient past all the way up until now. So I'm really excited to keep tabs on that. I guess we've covered where people can find you. We've covered future plans, but I do want to know your opinion on the sustainability of foraging and hunting wild food. If it's something you think everyone can engage in, or if the land can't really support everyone going out and foraging. And that's a big question I know a lot of folks wrestle with, especially someone like me who's kind of out on social media promoting, yes, go out and forage. It's good for your health. It's great food. Go, do it. But is it something that really the land can sustain? Is everybody doing wild foraging?
My gut would be to say, no, it can't sustain everybody foraging. But, in the same breath, I would say everybody is not going to be foraging. There's an ethnobotanist in Poland whose work I like. Łukasz Wuchoy is his name, and I could spell that for you if you want. But he was asked the same question in a radio interview, and he encouraged people to go for plants that he calls semi-wild, which are basically the disturbed area loving weeds as a starting point. Different plants can handle different amounts of foraging, different intensities. Certainly, I mean, I think all of our non-native species are pretty much no-brainers in terms of, go ahead and forage them. But that said, and I do think Sam, again, outlines a really nice set of principles to follow in terms of what plants can take more harvest and what plants can take less. A really obvious example might be something like ramps, which are very popular, which when you dig up the bulb, it kills the plant. And so, you need to be conscious of that. Sometimes when driven by economic gain, there have been instances of full beds being just dug up, from one end of the plot to another, and that's not going to help that plant sustain itself for future generations. But there are practices, a lot of which we've learned from traditional ecological practices, ecological knowledge rather, where you spread out your harvest, or you harvest after the plant has produced seeds and you put the seeds back in the hole. So I think I would say to people who are starting out foraging to go for those non-natives and go for those weeds and go for those berries and fruits, which are designed to disperse seed. And, maybe go a little more slowly with native root vegetables until you know what each individual plant can handle. I think, and that's what I've done. I'm just barely starting in on root vegetables now, honestly, because I had a lot I wanted to learn before I did so. I'm talking about native root vegetables. Yeah. Go ahead and harvest the dandelion roots. They can take it. I get them every year.
Yeah, exactly. The dandelions can bounce back. Well, and it does seem like one great rule of thumb to just not take everything that you see and really develop your own relationship with different plants and even different mushrooms to learn a little bit more about their life cycle, about how they reproduce. Especially with certain mushrooms, you can tell when their spores have dropped. So that's really the better time to collect them. Once you know the mushroom or the plant better, it becomes obvious kind of how to harvest it the best way with making sure the population continues in that area. So it's a huge topic. And every time I ask a guest, I know that it's kind of this massive question that a lot of foragers are faced with. But I'm always inspired, and you've just done it here, to hear people's different strategies or different insights about sustainable harvesting. I think there's a huge future in wild foods, and there's so much more for us to learn about sustainability that I think this conversation will be in a much different place in even a couple decades as more foragers get more and more familiar with sustainable practice.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. In the book I'm reading, Tending the Wild, she talks about how it was a pretty much universal principle among California indigenous groups, like all of them, that you leave some behind. You leave some behind for the animals. You leave some behind. And then another practice that I learned firsthand is thanking. My husband's better at thanking out loud when he harvests, thanking the plants, thanking the earth. And I sometimes do it quietly in my head. But this thanking kind of clues you in to that this is another living being that you're partaking of. It kind of just feels like it would inspire responsible practice.
Yes, I love that idea. I think your husband has it right on. Clearly, he knows more about wild foods than you might have originally let on. But
He's great, yeah.
But yeah, that kind of simple little ritual can just bring that level of consciousness to you where you don't just immediately harvest everything. You think, oh, wait, thank the land. Yeah, really, how much do I have to take? I'm always looking to incorporate more of that practice into my own foraging. So we've covered a lot of ground and a lot of material. It's enough for multiple podcasts. So, down the line, when your book does come out, I would love to have you back on when I've gotten a chance to read it and really dive deep into some of the concepts that are covered, some of the specific cultural traditions, because I know for me, that's some of the most interesting stuff out there. Cool. Like when you're laying out the recipes and where you get ideas for different wild food, that is just absolutely fascinating stuff. But I will move to my kind of 3 closing questions that I ask all my guests. I'm always surprised at the amazing array of fascinating answers that I get. And the first one, I'm going to change a little bit. I'm going to say, what is one mushroom that you love and why? And then what is one plant that you love and why? It doesn't have to be a favorite because I know that would be impossible, but just one you're thinking of right now or for whatever reason that you love and why of each.
Sure. Okay, so for the mushroom, I have picked wood ears, Auricularia auricula, these brown, jelly-like, ear-looking.
Yeah, ears of the forest.
Yeah, somewhat translucent mushrooms that grow on recently dead trees that still have their bark. And I don't know, I like them because oftentimes, even if I'm in an area that other mushroom hunters have frequented, they leave the wood ears alone. You can always find wood ears, and they're good. I had a chef turn me on to some preparations with wood ears. I do like looking to Chinese cookery for wood ears, and I really like them. So, yeah, that's my pick for mushrooms. A less utilized, but still good wild forage mushroom.
I was going to say less acknowledged, but you just brought up the Chinese culinary tradition, and I know it's ubiquitous in Chinese. They use a lot of wood ears in their cooking, and they taste delicious. So a fantastic choice. And then, again, an impossible task, but what is one plant? What is one plant that you love and why?
For that, I picked the pinyon pine. I'm really taken by wild piñones or pinions or pine nuts, so when we buy pine nuts from the grocery store, those come from a number of different species, but they are almost all imported. So we do get a lot of pine nuts from China. North Korea produces pine nuts, Afghanistan, Italy. Yeah. So there's a big export in pine nuts, and pine nuts are a wild harvested product. So like our annual imports vary from year to year which country we get them from based on who's had a good season. Okay. They're hand harvested, and that's why they're so expensive. So the funny thing is that the U.S. has millions of acres of pinyon pines. Like estimates range from 55 million acres to 100 million acres of pinyon pine. Okay. And they produce delicious edible pine nuts. If you catch them at the right season. They don't have mass years every year, but they do, when they do, the nuts are delicious, So I've been studying those. Here locally, we have Pinus edulis, which is called Colorado or New Mexico or two-needle pinyon. And then further west and north, there's Pinus monophylla, which produces bigger nuts in softer shells, a little less oily. And there's a number of other pines that produce nuts big enough to eat, but I just really love the pinyon pines.
An untapped food resource. The fact
Sure,
that we have
absolutely.
all these amazing pine nuts and we're importing them, what are we thinking?
Yeah, and so as I've learned more about how Indigenous people tended the landscape, I learned that pinyon pines were it seems as though pinyon pines were effectively pruned by hitting the branches to knock the nuts down, and that actually may have enhanced production. And then in some areas, you see there's rules against hitting the pine trees. So I'm kind of interested in that, and that's a direction I want to explore further. But then there's some Indigenous groups that have a taboo against hitting the pinyon pines. And there's a Navajo belief that if you hit the pinyon pines, early winter will come. Varied thoughts on how to approach pinyon pines. But yeah, I really like the pine nuts. I actually, while preparing my notes for this interview, I sat here and ate like an entire jar full of them.
Oh, that's incredible. We're going to have like Wild Food Girl brand pine nuts or something. I'm seeing it already. But another illustration too of this vast well of Indigenous knowledge that we can go back to now, as wild food gets on the rise. And I'm one symptom of that. As people get more and more interested in it, it's like, man, how fortunate and blessed are we that we can go back to the history of these peoples that were doing these practices for thousands of years and may have given us this roadmap into a more sustainable future. I love that idea.
I have to say, it's not something I take lightly either. If, last year I took a road trip to Nevada, and I met a Navajo couple there that took me in, and we foraged pine nuts together. And my new friend, I'm not going to say her name because she's a very private person, and she is a plant healer. And she started telling me all of this wonderful information about plants that she knew. And she said, don't tell anybody. This is a secret. And I respect that. And so I don't know exactly how to walk that line when I learn information, traditional ecological knowledge that has been recorded, years ago from Native people. But I certainly do recognize the immense value that generations of people who were on this land have amassed about wild food and wild landscape tending. So,
well, there's a massive gravity to that information, a massive responsibility with that information. So there's all of these tricky parts in that relationship. And I've had another forager I interviewed bring up some of these same ideas, that he's been asked not to share certain practices because there's a proper way to come into this knowledge, a proper reverence that has to be associated with it. That this knowledge isn't necessarily the domain of everyone, and we have to respect those who really originated it. A huge, huge thing to think about. Thank you for that perspective. And then my final question, what is the lasting impact you hope to make with your work? And this doesn't have to be something grandiose necessarily, but just what do you hope the lasting legacy is of the work you do with wild foods and teaching people and writing a book? What do you hope the lasting impact of that is?
Yeah, well, I think the obvious answer is that I hope people will be comfortable foraging and eating the foods I talk about in the book,
Right.
In a broader sense, certainly I do hope to influence some types of thinking, whether it be ecological, or connection building, or maybe just inspiring for, budding wild food teachers. Ultimately, I have on a bucket list too, and I'm not sure when I'm going to circle back to it, but I also would like to maybe help land managers redefine policy as it relates to foraging. There's plenty of places where you're not allowed to forage, where we could have bag limits like they do for fishing, or a set of sustainable guidelines like take the non-natives and take just the fruits and the nuts. I do feel that Indigenous people with a tradition of harvesting a particular resource should be considered that maybe they're exempt from limits where bag limits do occur. And there are some areas that do a good job of this, that set aside land areas for Indigenous harvesters only. But I'd like to look at that a little more closely too. And then I'd like to also, within this, maybe tackle some weird and harmful management practices like broadcast herbicide spraying or chaining, which has historically been done to remove many, many, many pinyon pines that are seen as invading grasslands. They take big tractors and they drag a battleship anchor chain between them, and they just uproot these hundreds of year old trees. So that one I would love to see
Oh my gosh.
re-examined.
Well, I think we're all rooting for you to then make those changes or make influence in that way. And, all the modern knowledge now that's coming out about wild foods and agroforestry and really ecological practices, I pray that that gets implemented by whether it be government or private land managers. Start incorporating this information a little more intelligently because it's out there now, and these worlds need to come together, I think.
Yeah, I agreed.
Well, Erica, thank you so much for coming on the show, sharing amazing perspectives, amazing information about wild food. I think everyone now is going to be excited for get our hands on this book. I don't know if we can wait 2 years. But yeah, wish you all the best in all the work you're doing. And thank you so much for coming on Mushroom Hour.
Darren, thank you so much. And thank you for this podcast, which I will continue to listen to because I really enjoy it.